Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the state's team, Attorneys Crawford and Sitzberger and myself, as well as Detectives Hoppy and Plennis and Ms. DeVolcanier, thank you so much for paying such close attention during this trial. I have to say that it stuck out in my head when I would look over at how carefully you were all listening, and we really do appreciate that. This is my opportunity to argue the case. The evidence is in, and soon you'll be asked to deliberate whether we've met our burden in this case on all three counts. All three counts follow this theme of murder, greed, and lies that my co-counsel introduced during opening statements. And that's how we'll discuss it here this morning, starting with count 1, the first-degree intentional homicide of Lynne Hernan, and moving into the greed. Count 2 being the theft while Ms. Hernan was alive, and count 3 being the theft from Ms. Hernan's estate. When we talk about count 1, the judge just read you the elements. Ladies and gentlemen, we submit to you that in this case, Ms. Kurczewski caused Lynne Hernan's death with the intent to kill her. You heard moments ago that it's not necessary that every fact be proven directly by a witness or an exhibit, and that in fact circumstantial evidence can be just as powerful. Whether it's direct or circumstantial evidence, the only thing that matters is whether it satisfies you beyond a reasonable doubt. The circumstances in this case are significant. The cause of death in this matter, as determined by Dr. Bedritsky, is poisoning. Tetrahydrozoline is a poison. Dr. Bedritsky talked to you about her job. It is her job for Waukesha County to make determinations on cause and manner of death. She told you that it took her almost a year to do that in this case. She was the only expert who actually saw Ms. Hernan. She performed the autopsy. She testified that she viewed Ms. Hernan's tissues microscopically. She sent numerous toxicological samples to NMS labs. She reviewed thousands of pages of medical records. She conducted research and consulted with other experts and considered the facts at the death scene. And ultimately, she told you, without hesitation, that the poisoning that occurred in this case was at the hand of another. That's what homicide means. Death at the hand of another. Dr. Bedritsky was not here to tell you who did that. She was not concerned with that at all when making these determinations. That's not her job. But she did testify that she considers this case to be unique in a couple different ways. Definitely, the toxicology was atypical. That scene was atypical. And she told you it was atypical both because of things that were there and things that weren't there. Like tetrahydrozoline bottles. Dr. Bedritsky told you that it was significant to her that of all the medication, pills, and bottles, and powders at the scene, that Ms. Hernan's toxicology did not indicate elevated levels of those prescriptions. Certainly not fatal levels. There was only one poison in Ms. Hernan's toxicology, and it was eye drops, and they weren't on the scene. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the misleading scene that caused investigators from day one to believe this was a pill overdose was very intentional. It was intentional by the only person who was there, other than Ms. Hernan, It was an intentional way to mislead. This theme of Ms. Kurczewski's intent being to mislead will carry us through the rest of the discussion this morning. And the motive? To get out of trouble, right? Because what was presented by Ms. Kurczewski to the first responders at the scene was not at all what the actual cause of death was. Ms. Kurczewski talked about how ill Ms. Hernan had been, how she liked to use her pills. There's no suicide note. Dr. Bedritsky talked to you. Ms. Hernan was not on the verge of death. This chart looks at the substances we've talked about so many times in this case. Again, only one of them is a poison. And I submit to you that the fact that the poison is in the toxicology is circumstantial evidence of the person's intent who gave it to her. The other substances underneath the tetrahydrozoline are not anywhere near fatal levels. Dr. Bedritsky told you that even together, those other substances would not have caused the death because it was the tetrahydrozoline that was so significant that that level was fatal. You were asked to make a lot of assumptions about perhaps Ms. Hernan's character, I guess, in the fact that the baclofen and cyclobenzaprine were even there, right? Because she had been told to stop taking those. They shouldn't have been there. They shouldn't have been there, you kept being told. They shouldn't have been there. The tetrahydrozoline shouldn't have been there at all, because if she was using it as eye drops, it would have been under 1. The level would have been under 1.0. The reason Ms. Hernan wasn't taking baclofen and cyclobenzaprine is because she herself reported having side effects she didn't like. And they were not life-threatening side effects. They were rashes. They were salt in her mouth. They were weight gain. When you think about all of the counts in this case, you're going to have to think about who Ms. Hernan was. And I want you to think about the different sources of information that you've received during this trial about Ms. Hernan. And consider the sources of that information. You heard in this case from 3 of Ms. Hernan's closest friends. People that she loved. Anthony Posa told you he would go over there and she'd make him lunch during college and they'd talk about movies, black and white movies. They'd talk about her dad, who was in the military. Corinne Posa showed you birthday cards that she still had from Ms. Hernan. She was a very thoughtful person. She liked to cook. You heard that she would bring food to parties. Corinne Posa told you that they had an affinity for shoes together, and she laughed a little when she looked at that note on one of the birthday cards. Corinne Posa told you that she had gone thrift shopping and rummaging with Ms. Hernan because she loved to get a deal. Ms. Hernan was making plans with these people. Jim Kelleher told you they were making plans because he still had a birthday gift for her after she got out of the hospital. Anthony Posa and Keith Lang saw Ms. Hernan after they had had lunch, and she made plans to see Anthony soon. Ms. Hernan was always thoughtful about her appearance, and that's significant. She gave gifts that were meaningful, not necessarily expensive. She was overall, as we've seen in the patterns presented, frugal. She had a very high credit score. She paid cards down. She didn't spend a ton of money. She certainly was not someone who used technology very well. In fact, Ms. Posa told you that when she'd have photos of Anthony, Ms. Hernan would want her to physically send those to get printed so she could pick them up. She could not even manipulate the photo application on a smartphone. let alone some of the other things that she's been alleged to have been involved with in this case. She loved her pets, and you heard even from the insurance agent, she was a thoughtful person, making Christmas gifts of food, low-cost items. That is in great juxtaposition with how Ms. Hernan's been portrayed in this trial. You heard over and over that she was angry. She was so angry, she was giving up. She wanted to get rid of all of her money. For some unknown reason, she wanted to have no more liquidity at the time of her death. She was suicidal. How many times did you hear these things about Ms. Hernan? And the suggestion that she was apparently scamming the government because she got food share. Hiding assets from the government to accept government assistance. I want you to think about the sources of these kind of attributes for Ms. Hernan. Because ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to make credibility determinations in this case. And you have to consider what intent the source of information had. Was it to mislead you? Was it to shift your focus? What's the motive behind those kind of statements? You need to consider that when you're deciding about intent. Because at the core of this case really is the defendant's intent and the lack of consent for those theft counts. And those are all questions that Ms. Hernan can't answer because she was murdered. That's why these questions have to be answered with circumstantial evidence. And that includes motive, which is different from intent. But it's someone's reason for doing something. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that in this case, Ms. Kurczewski's intent is clear. It was to kill. The intent behind her lies is to mislead. And the motive is her own personal benefit, whether it be getting out of trouble or money. Count 2 is the theft while Ms. Hernan was alive. Again, these two things Ms. Hernan can't tell you about, so we rely on the circumstances. One significant one is the difference in the patterns that you saw between Ms. Hernan and Ms. Kurczewski in this case. There was testimony about this and information gleaned from all of the financial records about these. Ms. Hernan was paying cards down. She had a great credit score. She wasn't using a ton of ATMs. She wasn't lavishly spending, right? You heard that she bought herself a vehicle and some jewelry. But really, other than that, she's not going on vacations. She's not buying computers and iPads and things, televisions. And she's spending her money in Waukesha County in person, not online. You saw the patterns of Ms. Kurczewski in this case. The credit cards are close to their max. There's a lot of ATM and cash advances. The spending is happening at places where Ms. Kurczewski can get cash out and gamble. Whether it be a casino or a bar, there's been testimony in this case that Ms. Kurczewski spent significant sums of money on slot machines in the geographic area where she lived, and additionally, using a lot of online activity. You were shown this credit score comparison, and you'll see that when Ms. Hernan's score plummets is the same time that all those credit card accounts are maxing out, becoming due. No payments are being made on loans. Her score plummets in the last 3 or 4 months before her death. And ladies and gentlemen, the financial aspect of this case and the investigation even was very complex. It took a lot of time. There were a lot of records. There were a lot of things that needed to be put out in a timeline or patterns so that we could understand it. It was not a simple review. I submit to you that that was exactly Ms. Kurczewski's intent. The intent to mislead and the motive for financial gain. We focused on these accounts, the top 3 belonging to Ms. Hernan and the bottom 2 belonging to the defendant. And we talked about the theft coming out of Lynne's accounts and going into the defendant's accounts. That money market account was the big account that there was $250,000 in, right? That was an account that Ms. Hernan didn't pay bills from. She didn't write a check to, We Energies from the money market account. And Detective Plentis told you why that was. Because there's penalties on an account like that for too many transactions. So what you saw happening as a pattern was that Ms. Hernan would move money from the money market account into her own checking account where she'd pay bills. The only checks written from this account, aside from one, go to the defendant. No one else is getting thousands of dollars from this account. There's memo lines shown along the right side. I submit to you that the intent behind those memo lines is to mislead. Because that's not what these funds were used for. We painstakingly went through Ms. Kurczewski's spending habits. There was no IRS payment. She got a tax return that year. There were no doctor bills for procedures, endoscopy procedures. There was not huge sums of money going to car payments. There were thousands and thousands of dollars a month spent at Stalis Palace. That's what you saw on the defendant's finances. A bank account that held $250,000 less than 2 years later had $87 and change in it. And $134,000 plus of that money went to the defendant in the form of 20 checks. The last 2 entries on here were electronic checks. Both written October 1st of 2018, 2 days before Ms. Hernan dies. And I say written, but they really weren't written, were they? Because they're electronic. This is internet check. What's the top one for? $5,000 to the defendant. And the bottom one is a check that went directly to the defendant's mom's apartment complex. These funds came out of the BMO money market account. These checks were made online. On the same day these checks were written, the defendant, who never had a BMO account of her own, downloads the BMO Harris mobile banking app. Lynne Hernan was not creating electronic checks 2 days before she died on the internet. The other main account of Ms. Hernan's was her checking account, the 5336 account. And during the trial, we focused a lot on the checks written from the money market account and this checking account. But there were also expenditures that we didn't include in the total, including over $4,000 spent on her check card while she was in the hospital. $4,000. She was only in the hospital from September 15th through the 28th. Whose spending pattern does $4,000 in 2 weeks sound like? There was over $3,000 of transactions after Ms. Hernan's death. We know that she wasn't using her check card. And ultimately, of all the checks that Ms. Hernan wrote from her checking account, included paying bills and over $10,000 in checks to the defendant. It's very telling when you look at two of those checks from Ms. Hernan's checking account. Ms. Hernan certainly knew how to give a gift if she wanted to. When Anthony graduated high school, Ms. Hernan's intent was to give him $200. So she wrote a check, and in the memo line, it says graduation. There's one other check in the form of a gift from this checking account. It's to Ms. Kurczewski. The memo line says gift. Look at the value of that check. $2,612.17 for a gift. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Kurczewski is the only person in Ms. Hernan's life getting gifts like that. There is absolutely nothing in this record for you to conclude that people like Anthony stopped caring about Ms. Hernan or that she stopped caring about him. Absolutely nothing. This makes no sense because the date of the $2,600 that Ms. Kurczewski got was July 22nd of 16. She didn't graduate from high school that day. She didn't get married. She didn't have a baby.
Object to information that's not in the record, Judge.
Overruled.
That check is not to celebrate a monumental part of Ms. Kurczewski's life, like the $200 that Anthony got when he graduated. When you add up these checks, you get that total that we talked about before. And ladies and gentlemen, that was Ms. Kurczewski's primary source of income. Right? You saw her paychecks over the span of almost 2 years total less than 50 grand. Her income was stealing from Ms. Hernan. And she never paid a dime of it back. This total of over $144,000 does not take into account several other pieces that are very suspicious in this case and give another piece of circumstantial evidence for you when you consider, is this really what Lynne wanted? In February of 2018, a loan is applied for 30 grand is what ultimately gets approved. At that point in time, Ms. Hernan is not in some sort of dire financial situation. She's not trying to buy a home. There's absolutely no reason gleaned from Ms. Hernan's financial accounts that she would need this kind of a loan in February of 2018. I submit to you that the way that this loan was applied for, that's not something that Ms. Hernan was capable of doing, frankly. Because these documents on the left, this kitten check, I've highlighted the last four of the account number on the bottom of that check. That was given to Goldman Sachs to say, here's the account, we want this money to go in, right? It has Lynne Hernan's name on it, but that's the defendant's account. The 8149 account did not have Lynne Hernan on it when this application was made. And what that means to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that that is fraud. It's not real. That check is not real. What else isn't real that Goldman Sachs received? We went through painstaking detail about the different financial banking support documents that loan provider received. Again, they're fraud. They are fraudulent. Someone who knows how to create documents and manipulate information turned the bank account information of herself to look like it was Ms. Hernan's. The information that Marcus Goldman Sachs was given during this application process includes that phone number that we've talked about, 262-421-5290. Detectives told you that is not a number that Lynne Hernan used. We know one person that used that number, and it was the defendant who gave it over the phone to a bank when she was pretending to be Lynne Hernan. The intent behind this is to mislead. The motive is financial gain. Ms. Kurczewski has to then add Lynne Hernan to this account before the money is dispersed because the loan is in Lynne Hernan's name. So the money gets put in to Jessy Kurczewski's account on March 8th of 2018, $30,000. And this was all done online. Ladies and gentlemen, Lynne Hernan knew how to give gifts if she wanted to give gifts. There are such more simple ways of transferring money to someone than this. And that circumstance goes directly to consent. That loan ultimately has some payments made from the estate account. Right? Goldman Sachs is saying there's minimum payments due on this loan. The defendant pays 3 times out of the Tri-City account, all the while having never listed that $30,000 loan on the final accounting. Ms. Kurczewski never discloses it. She never pays it. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that's because her intent was to mislead and her motive was for financial gain. We know Ms. Kurczewski is accessing these accounts without Ms. Hernan because this call placed near Ms. Kurczewski's mom's house is a call to the bank. If we could play that, please.
Thank you for calling City. My name's Melanie. Can I have your name as it appears on your card?
Lynne A. Hernan.
This is another circumstance for you to consider when you're trying to determine whether all of this financial activity was done with Ms. Hernan's consent. If she's with Ms. Hernan and Ms. Hernan wants her to have all this money, why do you have to pretend to be her on the phone? There's evidence in this record that Ms. Hernan knew how to make a call to make a transfer of funds, to talk to her bank on the phone. There's absolutely no logical reason why Ms. Kurczewski would have to call any of these banks and pretend to be Ms. Hernan. The intent was to mislead, and the motive was for financial gain. And that's why all of Ms. Kurczewski's information is on the victim's credit report, which the defense showed you. Exhibit 621. Ms. Kurczewski's P.O. box, her phone number, and the 5290 number are all on here. Another circumstance for you to consider in terms of whether this was all with consent. Ms. Kurczewski gave a pretty detailed account of what she and Ms. Hernan did on October 3rd of 2018, multiple times in those interviews. And when you look at these, it's actually quite morbid. Ms. Hernan is either being poisoned, dying, or dead, And Jennifer Flower gets a new 75-inch TV and an Apple Watch on Ms. Hernan's dime. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Lynne Hernan did not have the desire to have a JCPenney credit card opened up the day she died. Most or all of these things happening online, which Ms. Hernan also didn't do. At this point in time, the money market is depleted, the checking account is depleted, and the credit cards are maxed out. But there's still money for Ms. Kurczewski after Ms. Hernan is dead. Because when Ms. Hernan dies, Ms. Kurczewski then files for the informal administration in the probate estate. Her and Anthony Poza are the beneficiaries, and immediately Anthony told you that it was odd how quickly Ms. Kurczewski told him, you have to sign off on this stuff so we can get the estate going. And after that point in time, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that the Tri-City estate account became Ms. Kurczewski's source of income. Over $50,000 in cash went from that account into Ms. Kurczewski's pocket. It was not going to creditors. And when Anthony realized just how much money had already come out of that estate and asked some questions about it, we have a series of fraud handed from Ms. Kurczewski to Anthony Poza. The intent to mislead. The motive, financial gain. 52 pieces of paper Anthony Poza got from Jessy Kurczewski. Here's 17 of them. Fake. They're fake. The vet clinic administrator came in here and told you that's not correct. And not only was this created so that Ms. Kurczewski could pocket an extra $100, but the cat's put down and their name got deleted for no reason. Fake. 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 ServPro bill. Fake. Detective Plinus painstakingly went through these documents and showed you that they're all fraud created by someone who is very good at making fraudulent documents look correct. Mr. Poza thought, well, okay. And this is, you saw this through the handwriting expert. There's the Jeep title. Fake. Debts of decedent. Fake. These numbers don't even match the numbers that she tried to give Anthony Poza. And the will. Fake. Ms. Kurczewski knew that she had to create some reason why she had taken $50,000 out of the estate account, why she had spent another 15 plus in payments out toward other accounts. You heard testimony that there's one person involved in this case who has previously used fraud, used a mechanism to mislead for financial gain. 2 different times back in 2010. You can consider those for Ms. Kurczewski's intent and motive in this case. And I submit to you that it's very clear. Her intent is to mislead, and her motive is for financial gain. Ms. Kurczewski has a pattern of making things up to get herself out of trouble. Attorney Taylor testified that when she got involved, Ms. Kurczewski got removed as the personal representative. Ms. Kurczewski's backed into a corner at that point, right? She's not in charge of this anymore. So what does she do? What does she do to try to get herself out of hot water? She files with the circuit court this new will that removes Anthony with some, Attorney Taylor told you, very odd explanation that the first will was some sort of a test that then Anthony failed. She's never heard of that in her life because it's ridiculous. And the loan alone of $18,700 meets your value criteria on count 3. Not even considering the cash or payments that were made from the Tri-City account to the defendant's own debts. None of that inheritance loan funding is valid. That is theft. Ladies and gentlemen, you were told that personal representatives have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the estate. Not themselves. Not themselves. The estate was the rightful owner of the money at the time of this theft. And as one of the beneficiaries, Anthony Posa is listed as a victim on the count 3. None of that $87,000 went back into this estate account. There is an intent to permanently deprive. Ms. Kurczewski didn't pay any of it back. And ultimately, Mr. Posa receives a check for $13,000, which was half of what's left after Ms. Kurczewski stole from it. Again, you can't read someone's mind to determine intent. But the case comes down to intent. All 3 charges, right? Because Ms. Kurczewski says, I didn't steal from Ms. Hernan and I didn't kill her. But this is again where you're going to have to make some credibility determinations in the face of so much circumstantial evidence. Because, ladies and gentlemen, lies are very tricky to keep track of. The truth is very simple. And in this case, we've shown that Ms. Kurczewski lies when it will benefit her. When she's in hot water, she lies. Ms. Kurczewski compartmentalizes people in her life to keep them all from the truth of what's actually happening. And the intent behind this is to mislead them. And the motive is her own personal gain. Throughout this case, the question of whether Ms. Hernan was suicidal changes multiple times. On day 1, on October 3rd of 2018, Ms. Kurczewski is not telling any EMS worker or deputy, oh my gosh, she's been drinking Visine, she had a gun once, she's been trying to kill herself, I can't believe this happened. No, she's asked, point blank, was Ms. Hernan suicidal? And the answer is yes and no. But after this date, what do we know about Ms. Kurczewski? She's very interested in what the medical examiner knows and what the sheriff's department knows because she's calling. What's in the toxicology? Do we have the toxicology back yet? Until they finally tell her, we can't talk to you anymore. So she comes in and talks to detectives. This entire discussion on Ms. Kurczewski's point is to mislead them. She's not going to reveal she poisoned Ms. Hernan with tetrahydrozoline because she doesn't know they found it yet. She doesn't know that anybody knows what she did yet. So she's not going to bring it up, just like she didn't bring it up on the day it happened. Maybe they won't find it. Then we have the star. July 9th of 2019, when Ms. Kurczewski is finally told this.
I'll be honest, there's been 3 times that she said, I want to give up.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this anymore. And she always said, the day when it comes, I want your help. The day when it comes, I want your help. I said, I'm not helping you do anything. When it comes to pills or messing around with anything, I'm not looking for trouble. I'm not trying to get in trouble.
When she
She's
said
a
like
full-grown adult.
like our doctor from work.
So that's a pretty different story than that. As soon as she knows the gig's up, well, okay, 3 times she said she wanted to give up. Ms. Kurczewski is constantly considering the new information that she's getting and altering her story in a way that benefits her. The next day, she wants to talk to law enforcement. I want you to remember that. All of these interviews are because Ms. Kurczewski thought about things overnight and wanted to give more information the next day. So the next day, the question of was Lynne suicidal changes again.
Doing it because she was trying to find an easy way out.
She was trying
She
to
did
kill
the
herself.
pills first numerous times. That wasn't working.
So she was trying to kill herself by drinking Visine and vodka.
She also bought a gun offline
When
that
was
I
that?
disposed of for before she died too.
When? How long?
Oh, 2 months.
I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Ms. Kurczewski knew, well, they found it in the toxicology now. I have to say she was suicidal and that she drank it on her own to keep myself out of trouble. The intent behind all of this is to mislead, and the motive is to keep herself out of trouble. These focus over here. She bought these guns. Right? Misleading the investigators. There's these guns. She bought them. I wrestled one away from Ms. Hernan once. Okay, well, Ms. Kurczewski is really the person, based on the evidence, that acquired those items. The Brownell firearm, here's the phone call. Hey, I want to change the delivery from a residence to a FedEx pickup. That phone call is made from Ms. Kurczewski's phone near her house, and this is all an order placed on Ms. Hernan's credit card. This one's even more telling, because what do we know about September 27th of 2018? Lynne Hernan is at Waukesha Memorial Hospital, which is nowhere near the map that you're being shown from Exhibit 173. This is a phone call to Urban Arms, another order using victim's credit card. She's in the hospital, and the order is made on Ms. Kurczewski's phone. That's all nonsense. It's all an effort to mislead. Because in reality, Ms. Kurczewski's story changes iterations based on the amount of information that she has. And the only things that never change are things that only Lynne could correct. That she was suicidal, and that she wanted to give all of her money away. I'll say again, credibility is a huge task for you in this case. And when we talk about someone's credibility, you've seen firsthand things that Ms. Kurczewski has no problem lying about. Dan Radloff sat up there and told you that she would pretend to go to work when he was living with her. She would get up, get ready, and pretend like she had a job. Later saying, yeah, no, I'm not actually working. Up to big lies. Like a lie to a family she lived with. Why did the Craig family think Lynne Hernan was in a coma at Freighter? This is why. Because Ms. Kurczewski told that to Scott Craig. And remember why this comes up. In May of 2018, what's going on in Ms. Kurczewski's life that makes this lie something that's going to personally gain? She's going to gain from. The scenario is that Scott wants nothing to do with her anymore. And it's all an attempt to mislead, to shift your focus. Scott, forget about that and look over here. Lynne Hernan's in a coma. She was never in a coma at Freighter Hospital, and Ms. Kurczewski never told Scott Craig that. The detectives told Scott Craig that. The motive is to get herself out of hot water. And nonetheless, she lies about telling them that.
So I'd be out by her.
Again, this is the guy who swears he's told me she was in a coma.
No.
Why?
Never said that. Swear to God.
Why do you think he's so upset?
This is someone that she was closest with. She lived with. Scott Craig was also someone in Ms. Kurczewski's life that had to stay very compartmentalized. It is no coincidence that he never met Lynne Hernan, ladies and gentlemen. It is no coincidence that Scott Craig was not invited to the funeral dinner for Lynne Hernan, where Scott may have been able to talk with an Anthony Poza or a Keith Lang or a Corrine Poza. So sad about Lynn being in a coma at Freighter. Can you imagine if Scott would have said that at the dinner? No way. This was something that was so significant because he had no idea. Ms. Kurczewski was very, very good at misleading Mr. Craig. And he expresses the frustration and shock in this call that you heard from State's Exhibit 54.
I was told she was in the hospital. Your
She
best
was
friend was
in the fucking hospital numerous times.
Well, not in a coma for 5 months. That's what you told me. So,
I know that's what I told you.
Yeah,
I told
I
you
know.
that to protect
That's
you
pretty
for a
disgusting.
reason.
I told you that to protect you for a reason. That makes no sense, ladies and gentlemen. Another consideration in your credibility determination of the defendant in this case should be this January 2019 discussion, which happens up here on our timeline, well before the star. What is going on this day in January of 2019? Do you recall the beginning of this discussion? Scott Craig's mad at her. She's in hot water again. Right? However, that disagreement evaporates once she says this. Tetrahydrozoline in my blood. Detective Cole couldn't even pronounce the word tetrahydrozoline. And Jessy Kurczewski is spelling it out in a text message, pretending to be at the hospital. She obviously goes on to ever deny saying this in 2019. And then changes that story to, okay, it was a friend, and then changes that story to, okay, I actually drank it, but no one was really poisoned. But the main point that you need to consider, which bears on intent, is that in Ms. Kurczewski's own statement, she knows exactly how serious tetrahydrozoline is. And she's right about that. Because you heard testimony in this case that when used for nefarious purposes, perpetrators select tetrahydrozoline because it impairs memory, impairs judgment, reduces inhibition, produces a period of unconsciousness. It's not routinely detected, and it's available. Nonetheless, 6 months later, when Ms. Kurczewski is told, this is her response.
I get him.
And there's an anomaly in her toxicology. There's a drug in her system that's not supposed to be there.
And what would that be?
It's called tetrahydrozoline.
What is that?
Commonly known as eye drops.
This is six months have gone by. So now she knows. What does she say about whether Ms. Hernan was using it?
A lot. Like not enough, you can't take it through your eyes. It has to be ingested through orally.
I've never seen her drink it, ever. And why would you drink eye drops? I mean, what would it taste like? I don't even know, but...
Not, oh my gosh, I've been buying bottles of this stuff for her. Because she drinks it all the time and I've seen her drink it. No. It's...
Say it like that because that doesn't sound right, but I didn't give her anything. I didn't even give her pills wrong or vodka or drug. I didn't give her anything. I didn't give her this eye drop.
Then we have a period of time where Ms. Kurczewski is thinking, and the next morning she says, I want to talk again. Right? This is the next day.
I've gotten the Visine for her. I never put any in her, anything for her. Ever. Never. I bought it for her. That's as far as I've gotten. I've never even put it in her eyes for her.
I submit to you that the intent behind this is to mislead, and the motive is to get herself out of trouble. Or this would have been something she said on day one.
And she was drinking vodka and Visine.
Now, how do you know she was drinking vodka and Visine?
Because that's what she had mixed together. And that was the day before.
How do you know she had mixed Visine with her vodka?
Because that's what she did.
There's still some distance there, right? That was the day before. Again, there's a night that goes by. Ms. Kurczewski is thinking. And the next morning, on the 11th, I want to talk again. I've got more information.
She did, one time, the whole time I've known her, she drank one bottle in front of me. Just one time. One bottle. And she never did that afterward. I was so upset and hurt by it because I didn't want her to do this. I didn't think it was the best way to go. She was trying everything.
2 days ago, this person is saying, I've never seen her drink it ever. And now she's drinking a whole bottle of it in front of her. This is the same day.
The water didn't taste like anything, and the vodka, she liked it because she got like a little more of a buzz off of it.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and gentlemen, not one doctor or expert told you that that is factual at all. Dr. Thomas testified that she is unaware of anything that would suggest people are drinking tetrahydrozoline because of some euphoric or buzz. Dr. Bedritsky said the same thing. Even Dr. Spiller said that's not a symptom or side effect of drinking tetrahydrozoline. Again, the intent is to mislead.
Knowing she wants it.
Once I put in 2 drops for her.
Okay.
Once.
In what?
In her vodka.
Okay. And once was how long before that?
That was a month and probably 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks before. That was the only time I ever did it.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you determine credibility, you have to consider whether the source of the information has an interest in the outcome. This is the last version that you're left with.
Oh.
That bottle of water right there had in 6 Visines.
How do you know that?
Because that's what she put in it.
When?
She told me the 3 days before I threw it out. And she asked for it that morning.
Did you give it to her?
Yeah.
I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, can you even rely on that? Credibility is again questioned as we begin this wild goose chase. On July 12th, there's the first little piece of information about things that are hidden away. And before you even dive into this, I want you just to think, why in the world would someone hide these types of items? Nonetheless, it starts with the BMO lockbox.
Get me out.
Okay.
That's what I'd like.
Okay.
Check her Bemis Harris. Her BMO Harris bank.
Okay.
She has a lockbox.
I thought you said this was a storage shed.
That's where she put her items. No.
This is a BMO Harris lockbox now.
Correct. I didn't give any specifics for a reason.
You said a storage
I
shed.
said it's not in my name.
So in a lockbox, there is a gun.
No.
There is. Where's the gun?
I said she has her stuff and I have my stuff.
Ladies and gentlemen, on July 12th, when Ms. Kurczewski tells Aaron Hoppy to look in that BMO lockbox, she absolutely knows it's empty. Because she was the last one there with her mom the day after Lynne Hernan died. And in April of 2019, before these interviews, she surrenders that box, signing that there's nothing in it. Shift the focus. Look at things that don't matter. She has a new layer to this whole story then.
Tell us where you buried this stuff.
No, I'll tell you.
Where'd you bury it?
It's in Whitnall Park.
Whitnall Park.
That's where my bunny used to be buried. It's behind my mom's apartments.
Again, why, instead of telling anyone what happened, I'm going to keep it quiet, and I'm going to save some of this stuff in case Lynne Hernan does die, and then after she's died, and I've lied about how she died, I'll have it buried. You can't even connect it in a logical way if you try.
It does get muddy and swampy certain times of the year. It wasn't when I went. I did this literally before she even passed. And it was all together in 3 Ziploc bags.
Or is it in a box or anything?
Nope.
Or it's just
3 Ziploc bags. I just kept
bags.
Ziploc bagging it, and then the freezer bags.
And how far down?
I would say about 4 to 5 feet.
4 to 5 feet?
Yep.
Are you kidding me?
4? I don't know. I guess.
4 feet?
Hold on.
You understand? You're
Maybe
just
not.
over 4 feet.
Okay, like this. What is this? I'm not good with
Okay,
that.
that need 2? Okay, holy shit, I'm like 4 feet.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That is like
Man, when you put
Anyone stop?
If you give me more
a
like
body in there or something?
I'm one of those people sometimes like I'm better like I have the roads.
Nice.
Like I can't tell you roads, but I can show you. Yeah, I guess that's true. I'm 5'11".
Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Kurczewski is not stupid. She knows the difference between 5 feet and 18 inches. But Detective Hoppy wasn't buying it, so the story changes. Law enforcement attempts to find these things every time she says they exist. Metal detectors and detectives out in parks looking for rocks over burial sites. Her initial claim of a storage shed somewhere comes up again on the 16th.
Storage shed, Jessy. I know there's a storage shed.
There isn't. I swear to God, there's not a storage shed. I put that in everything. I just said that because I thought by saying that would help me get out. I swear to you on everything.
She thought it'd help her get out of trouble. That's why she said that. Ladies and gentlemen, the reality of Jessy Kurczewski looks a lot different than this person in Exhibit 206 crying about a lost burial site. The reality of this person, her acts, words, and statements, is that she is accessing documents about criminal poisoning in July of 2018 and deleting them in February of 2019. Household poisons. Arsenic trioxide. Ladies and gentlemen, what else do we know happened right around February of 2019 in this case? Right in here. The medical examiner wouldn't talk to her anymore. The reality of this case, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is someone with a fair amount of poison research on her own phone. This is someone who has profited over $144,000 before death and over $80,000 after. This is someone who misleads others when she's in hot water. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Ms. Kurczewski thought she would get away with this or be able to talk her way out of it. But the reality of this is that the cause of death is a poisoning, and the manner of death is a homicide. At the time Lynne Hernan died, she was worth more to Ms. Kurczewski dead than alive. And this person that you heard about, this loving person on the left, did not kill herself. Based on all the facts and evidence that you've seen, the state is going to ask that you return 3 verdicts of guilty in this case. Thank you.